everyone. I am Melissa Forziat. I'm a keynote speaker and the host of this Halt and Catch Fire rewatch podcast. When I speak, my topic is something I call Take the Doughnut, which for me is another way to say Carpe Diem. It's about going after the things that you want in life. Something that I wanted to do this year was rewatch the show Halt and Catch Fire, but this time talk about it with other people, all of you. And we're up leveling that because I'm getting a chance to talk with people who worked on this show. And before I introduce today's guest, who I'm very excited to introduce, just a quick housekeeping item. If you are brand new to the show Halt and Catch Fire and you're looking for spoiler-free coverage, go check out the episode recaps. Those are spoiler-free up until the episode that you're on. These interviews, who knows what details will get mentioned from the show. We could talk about any detail from any episode. So just know that up front. But if you're not afraid of that, please stick around because I've got a great guest today who is Zack Whedon, who was a writer credited for 6 episodes, 2 in seasons 1, 2, and 4. So 106, 108, 205, 208, 403, 408. We'll get into the details of that as we go through. Also, Zack is credited as co-producer for season 1 and producer season 2 and co-executive producer for season 4. Welcome, Zack.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
It is so good to talk with you. I am really excited to talk with somebody who sort of worked on the whole span of the show as a writer. But before we get into it, what was your role? How did you get to this job? How did you get connected with Halt and Catch Fire to begin with?
So first of all, let me just say that thank you for having me, and doing this made me rewatch these episodes that I wrote, which I hadn't seen in a very long time, and was just a beautiful experience for me because I love the show, but also it brought back so much memories of making it and of what was going on in my life as I was writing these things. So it was a hugely fun thing. I came to the show. I worked with Jonathan Lisco, who was the showrunner on seasons 1 and 2 on the last season of Southland, a show called Southland. And we had a great time working together, really meshed creatively well, and he's a lovely human being. So when he began working with the Chris's and to showrun Halt, he reached out to me about the show and sent me the script, and then I sat down with the Chris's and John and Jonathan, and yeah, we had a great conversation. I loved the script. It was beautifully written, and knew that it would be a really sane, positive work environment because Lisco was running it, and that's always important to find. So yeah, I was very gung-ho about it.
Oh, that's so good to hear. So there was really no existing seasons of this show to see to tell you what this product was going to be. So what kind of research did you do coming into this, if any?
The Chris's recommended a couple books. I can't remember what they are now, but so I did that sort of research about the industry, about the tech industry at that time, and a lot of that stuff goes over my head because I'm not a scientific minded person. But I was, reassured because we had actual experts who would be helping us. So our job as writers was to bring the humanity and drama and all that stuff, and then someone could read our scripts and tell us when we were being stupid about things.
Yeah. One of the interesting things about this show, and I'm guessing that this was a product of never knowing if you were going to be picked up between seasons, but there's basically sort of like 2 writers' rooms. There's seasons 1 and 2, and there's seasons 3 and 4. You, however, are a name that crosses over, from season 1 to season 4. I think we just lost you for season 3 there. So can you share some of the nuances of those different writers' rooms for us? Like what was different about how that operated?
So, the biggest difference was that in seasons 3 and 4, the Chris's were running the room without Lisco, and because they had learned enough to run it on their own, and Lisco had other things to do, um, and so that was the main difference. It was also, by the time I returned in season 4, they were very confident in what the show was and was not, and there weren't those larger questions of like, what show are we making? Like which you have at the beginning of a series. Both times, I mean, when I showed up in the season 1 room, right away, day one, I was like, these people are all insanely smart and insanely talented, and I need to be showing up 100% every day to earn my place at the table with these people. Like I'd never been in a room like that with, I mean, just everyone top to bottom was amazing. And then because of the particularly long stretch between seasons 2 and 3, basically everybody had to find other work, and no one could come back. So the Chris's had to assemble an entirely new room, which is not easy. And when I went off to work on another project, I would have loved to work on season 3, but got to watch that season just as a fan with no exposure to what was going to happen or anything like that, and was just floored by it. Thought it was incredible. And then returning for season 4, day one had the same experience. Like they had filled the room with amazing people, amazing writers who, I learned so much from. And yeah, it's just incredible that they were able to do that twice.
Oh, this is so good to hear. So as somebody who worked on seasons, particularly seasons 1 and 4, in a more general way, to what extent was there a nod to the first season as you were wrapping up in the 4th season?
I'm trying to think about like conscious, what was it's hard to determine now in retrospect what we were aware of, and in terms of nodding to the first season, maybe that's just my memory failing, but I was struck, this is a tiny thing, but rewatching it in I think it's my first episode in season 1, when they first turn on the computer and everybody, Joe's about to do it and everybody goes, Boz, 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 Boz. And it's this sort of heartbreaking thing for Joe because he's not able to, Boz connects with people on a human level very easily, and Joe has difficulty with that. And it's a moment that dramatizes that. And then in season 4, when they are launching Comet, and Joe gets sort of tripped up. I guess this is maybe episode 9. I don't know, but they all start
There's a
chanting
commercial.
Comet, Comet.
Yeah.
Right. And they start chanting Comet, 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 Comet. And just those 2 moments felt so parallel to me. And that, Joe at that point's mourning Gordon. He's made a real human connection and understands that the project is more important than him and all this stuff. He's grown so much as a person. And I was just really, I thought that parallel was very cool rewatching it.
What a great parallel you drew there. I don't know if I would have thought of that. So I'm so glad that you highlighted that for me, for all of us. I mean, these are the kind of details we'll get. So let's talk about your episodes, because there's so much to say about the specifics. And I have to start here. So 106 was your first episode that you wrote. It's called Landfall. We're going to see Gordon seeing a flower in a, I don't know, computer components motherboard, I think it is. He can't quite reach it. He wakes up. So it's sort of framed as it could have been a dream in that episode. But as the series goes on, we're going to learn about his CTE. We're going to see him pass out on other occasions. We're going to see as his symptoms develop and progress. How much conversation was there at this point about why Gordon saw this flower and his possible illness?
I don't remember, but I think that it was, we wanted to have like these hallucinatory moments and dramatize that Gordon was like super fried by this work. And there was this emerging thing about Gordon that he had these moments of like bizarre behavior, and with the digging in the backyard and stuff like that. And so, you know, as I remember it, it was just a dream, but toward the end of that season, I believe was when we narrowed in on the idea of him getting sick.
Interesting.
Yeah. But then again, those first two seasons in the room sort of blur together for me. But yeah, that he was starting to show symptoms of something, or just that arriving at the conclusion that Gordon had something aberrant about his existence. Yeah.
Yeah. So it sounds like it, you know, even though we started to see signs of something earlier, it wasn't necessarily defined in the writer's room right away, where it would be headed. It's really interesting. I'll tell you on a deep dive, there's a lot of tricky spots I had to sort of like get around to be spoiler free in the coverage. And it started happening really early in season 1. So if you look back, it seems like it was all planted there. You know, Joe starts.
I'll just say, sorry, on that point, just I think one of the really cool things about the first season of a show is that you're in conversation with it. Like, you have an idea of what it's going to be, and then you start seeing episodes shot, and it starts giving you feedback and telling you what the show is. And like, once you start identifying those things, and it's this process of discovery that's very exciting. And I think that's probably what was going on there, is that we were exploring and we found something.
Yeah, it makes sense because there's so many departments involved in it too, and everybody is making decisions. So it's fun to see how that comes together. You know, in that same episode, we're going to see Joe. We're going to see a montage of him basically being an empty suit. He has a closet full of the same suit. He wears it like the model from the billboard. But then in this episode, he spends an evening with Donna and Haley and Joni. And I feel like it changes him in some way. Or at least he makes some sort of a decision to start changing. He even opens up to Cam for the first time after that experience. Tell me about the evolution of Joe that you were seeing either in this episode or even in season 1 as a whole.
Well, again, to the point of the show speaking to us, Joe in particular, it felt like there was the broadest exploration of who this person was in the room, you know, like lots of crazy bad ideas that didn't end up on screen. And I think the show reflects that journey for him of self-discovery. Like, it's beautiful for me to see how where he gets to in season 4 personally. His understanding of himself, like, he's still Joe. He's still uh, you know, understands that he's going to throw chaos into every situation he enters into, but he understands himself. He doesn't fault himself for that any longer. He's comfortable with it. This is me, and people love him in spite of that. So he's able to love himself. It's very. I love that. But in season one, I think he's struggling to find his own identity. And so looking at a guy on a billboard, he's like, this is what people want, I'm not, I'll take off my tie and that'll make a difference, and, but it doesn't, because he hasn't connected on a deeper level. He hasn't shown people his soul and, his vulnerability. So the process of playing with Haley and Joni, he's able to forget himself a little bit, to do something that, with the hurricane zappers, with the flashlights, like that could be humiliating if you do it half-assed, or if you're self-conscious. Like, you have to do it with reckless abandon, and kids can bring that out of you, they want the way that they're able to connect to you is on a very sort of basic human level, and through that process he's able to gain some understanding of what's lacking in his life, which is those personal connections, like seeing Donna and Gordon and the kids at the end of the episode all together. They have a safe space in a literal storm, and he doesn't.
To that point, this is a small question, a small detail. So this might be a quick one, but there's a scene, Gordon is trying to get Cabbage Patch Kids. He's on this quest, and it's, the middle of a hurricane. And at one point, at sort of towards the end of the episode, he sees a man, I'm assuming lying dead on the ground, electrocuted by a live wire. It's hard to make out in the show because it's pouring rain and he doesn't get right up close to this person. But when you were writing this, was this a person we were meant to know, or is this just a stranger?
Just a stranger. And that feels very much like a premonition in retrospect. But I think regardless of how Gordon ends up, he's grappling with mortality and getting older, and not having made his dreams come true and stuff like that. And in terms of how the genesis of that, I think it's certain. I think it had already become sort of a trope at that point of, like, if you're doing an 80s show, there's a Cabbage Patch episode because it's like a cultural touchstone. And but regardless, there's with 80, like, things set in the 80s, there's always some like product story of when, whatever Return of the Jedi came out, or like there's something like that. And so I think we thought it would be funny to do a Cabbage Patch story that ends in like a horrifying way.
Yeah, it's so good.
And I remember, and the guy in the parking lot who sells him the empty box, was it was based on an experience I had where I went to the grocery store. I was super sick, and I walked to the grocery store to get Alka-Seltzer cold medicine, and when I got home, I opened it up and there was just a rock inside of it. So I told that story in the room, and I think that must have been how it ended up in there.
And there it is, all your trauma just piled into the show, just like that.
Well, there's so many things over the episodes where I'm like, not only my memories, but other people's.
Yeah. So let's get to the next episode, 108. which is the
Mhm.
214s. It's an episode you co-wrote with Davi Waller. What was
Mhm.
I believe it's the only one that you co-wrote. What was the process for co-writing an episode, specifically this one with Davi?
So if I remember correctly, we broke the episode as a room, and then the two of us sort of divvied it up. In terms of who would write which scenes, and then we would give them to the other writer for notes and comments and stuff. And um, Dolly's, I think one of the greatest television writers who's ever lived, and so she probably had more notes on my stuff. But it was fun. It was really cool. Yeah.
Yeah, this one is a big episode for Gordon. He's like the hero of the episode. The FBI raids the office. He steals the giant back from the
Mm-hmm.
office. He basically assembles the whole team. He gets Cam and Joe and Donna so they can all go
Mm-hmm.
to Comdex. And it's like maybe the most heroic episode for Gordon in the show, practically. So
Mm-hmm.
uh, tell me a bit about like what you're trying to do with Gordon in an episode like this, and why he needs this.
Well, I think you said it. Like he needs this. Like Gordon fucks up a lot. There's a lot of unforced errors in his actions. Um, so yeah, it was to give him a big win, and just show again. He's reckless, but it's because he cares so deeply, and I mean that's which is sort of true of everybody, all the characters, but yeah, I think just to give Gordon that, you know, this unlikely hero, give him that moment. Yeah.
Yeah, we get a beautiful scene between Cam and Boz in this episode. He's going to take the fall for her about stealing the money from Cardiff Electric. And, this relationship really evolved. It feels like in a very natural way this season. Uh, Tell me about writing for Boz and Cam. A lot of people, I think, really, this relationship means a lot.
Yeah. Um, it was, you know, it was just so much fun. Like there's a scene in 5 or 6, whatever it is, where, yeah, during the storm where they have a drink together in the office. And these two people are so polar opposite, um, on paper. They really don't have anything in common in terms of their life experience, and but he admires her, and he says to her, "You're the future," and he's sort of fascinated by that. Um, and I think when we saw that scene of them together, we wanted more of it. Um, Toby was so fun to work with and to write for. Um, Another instance of the show speaking to you. There's a version of the show where Bosworth is the enemy for the whole season. Um, and but there was such joy in his performance and his interactions with other people. Um, and when you're writing a show, making characters bounce off of each other that haven't done that as much is really fun. And so putting these two people, you know, Cameron sitting down to have a scotch with an old guard Texas tech guy, um, just seemed fun, and it remained fun. And then I just before we got on, I was quickly going back through the episode 9 or episode 7 of season 4, um, and that he invites her to the courthouse when he's getting married, and says, "Well, she invited her daughter," like implying, that she's sort of, that he's a father figure to her. I just thought it was beautiful, like a beautiful evolution from that moment in season 1 to season 4, that they
Yeah,
got so close. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, if we go to 205, extract and defend, just I don't know. Thank you for giving us the nickname Admiral Eyebrows. I wish we would have heard it again
Mm.
ever in the show for Joe. Um, but the fact that there was like this feeling that the team had been using that nickname for Joe, where
Mhm.
did that come from?
Just I don't know. There's so many things in there in the show. Like I was always trying to in my drafts, like the first audience that you're going to give it to is the other writers to give notes on it and stuff. And I always wanted to make them laugh and so a lot of the time the work was like pulling back on the silly stuff that I put in there. But you know, Lee Pace has very impressive, bold eyebrows. They're movie star eyebrows, and uh, it was just like a joke on them having noticed that, and you know, I don't know.
I mean, this is the person we could thank right here, everybody. So good. Uh, more seriously, there's a very impressive face-off in a garage in this episode between. It starts with Cam and Joe, and then Sarah comes in and literally
Mm,
in the way they blocked it, she gets in the actual middle of them. It is such a tense scene, and it's like Cam has fully decided who Joe is. Joe hasn't decided who Joe is, and Sarah is very suspicious of it all because she thinks she knows who Joe is too.
mhm,
You know, there's a lot, like there's what the dialogue is, and then that's what's happening underneath it.
mhm.
When you've got a complicated scene like that, how do you go about writing this and making sure that you got to the thing that you were trying to get to?
Well, um, part of it is making sure that everybody involved understands the subtext of it, and that means talking to the with the director um, and the actors and uh, Mackenzie's fantastic all the time, and in that scene she's so good because even though she's not saying anything that saying any of what she's actually saying, what she means, she's saying it in a way so that Joe will know, you know, and um, all of that subtext is so palpable between them that Sarah can't ignore it. And I love the way that Alexa Palladino hands him the bottle of champagne at the end. Like, this was going to be, I don't know what the fuck's going on, but this is so much more fucked up than I understood, you know? And I brought this to celebrate, but even in that gesture, there's subtext of like, we have a lot to talk about, you know?
Yeah. It's such a loaded scene.
Mm-hmm.
On a lighter note, if we go to 208 Limbo, we're going to get a couple different party environments. This
Mm-hmm.
show is, most often in this space where we get a couple characters talking or really intimate scenes. But in this episode, we get two party scenes. And, we've got the mutiny party in their backyard. We've got the nightclub scene with Joe and Sarah where they're on MDMA. We got a lot more people to deal with here, a lot more sort of atmosphere to the environment that they're in. So, when you're writing scenes like this, what are some of the different considerations that you're making compared to a scene where it's like two talking heads?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's tough because you want to make it feel lived in and active and particularly in the mutiny party that there's a lot of simultaneity. There's like many different things happening at once, and you want there to be light and dark and all sorts of different colors. So um, it was always fun to write like throwaway little moments for the coders, like the guy saying like, "Did we land on the moon? Of course not." Like, and then um, the girl coming up to Cameron and thanking her for the site, which lets Cameron understand for the first time just how powerful this connection is, that that Donna's been championing and that they've created together. Yeah, so it's tough. It's also like super tough to shoot those things. But yeah, that was Daisy, I think, on that episode who directed it, and yeah, she did a great job. That was one that watching it, I was like, I was so tired when I was writing this. Like, I can hear it in the dialogue almost that because um I had a new baby, our first kid at that time, and I had like um my first episode that season when we were shooting it, I was writing this one, and there was chaos in my like in my family, and it was just insane. And I was like, wow, I can really hear that in these scenes. Like, yeah, it's wild. Like, I remember
It's so
I had to write it.
interesting.
We like something had happened in the room where we didn't have a lot of time, so I'd had to write it very quickly. The first draft, I mean, and yeah, it really put me back there in that moment of like sleepless nights, and yeah.
That's so interesting. There's like a sense memory in there for you because,
Mm-hmm.
as somebody who's done a deep dive on this episode and the
Mm-hmm.
many people who've commented on it, we haven't picked up anything
Mm-hmm.
like that to spot. But for you, it's like there's like an essence of it that stayed behind.
Yeah, yeah,
Wild. Wow.
yeah.
Well, so I want to get into some Cam and Tom stuff. I think actually the better
Mm-hmm.
thing to do would be to go to 403 for this.
Mm-hmm.
Which is this episode is called Miscellaneous. So we are going to see a flashback of we already know from 402 that their relationship is done, they're getting divorced. In 403, we're going to see a flashback of the fight Tom and Cam had after she revealed that she slept with Joe at Comdex in the previous
Mm-hmm.
season. We don't see them decide to stay with each other, but we know they will. We know that they're going to they're going to try to keep trying for years. They're going to try to have kids. I just think it's so interesting what we see and what we don't see about Tom and Cam from the moment they moved to Japan up through right here. So,
Mm-hmm.
how are you making decisions about what we need to see and what we don't need to see?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that's part of the work of writing is figuring out what is the essential moment of this. And um, weirdly, I think we got more and more confident in how elliptical we could be as the series went on. And the last episode we were talking about, the season 2 party episode, I feel like lacks that confidence. Like, there's stuff in there that um, doesn't absolutely need to be. Like, we could have been more elliptical in our storytelling there, and um, but also, trusting the audience to fill in what we're not telling them. I think that from the audience's point of view, that's satisfying. It's engaging, and you're participating in the show, and that's a secondary kind of satisfaction you can get from something that you're not being told everything. You're filling in the gaps.
It's so interesting you say that because I remember doing a podcast about 401 and we start off with that. It's not a oneer, but it looks like a oneer. That long sort of like time lapse sequence where we figure out what happened, but where Joe ended up in the basement working on the post-its, and we're tracking Gordon through the whole scene. And I remember getting on a podcast and saying, wow, this show really doesn't it wants to honor the people who have been with it for a while, and it's not going to spoon feed the people who are just tuning in. And I don't know when that started exactly, but it was definitely happening in season 4. So it's interesting. I'd have to think back if we saw more of that happening in season 3. But yeah.
I think that I get the sense that you do in season 3. I think, again, with a new show, like, you don't know how it's going to be received exactly. By season 3, everybody knew what the show was and wasn't. Like, it wasn't a ratings juggernaut, it wasn't, and it wasn't going to become that somehow, so I think that the Chris's got more and more comfortable with what the show was, where it fit in the world, and could honor that.
Yeah. If we talk about humor, this episode 403 has this great scene of Haley being pitched to for Gordon and Joe to buy Comet. It's one of the funniest scenes of the show. And also, it occurs to me that in the grand scheme of this show, women are not generally very successful in pitching for various, probably environmental reasons around them. And Haley, the next generation, is like, she comes out totally on top without even trying. Such a cool scene. Tell us about writing this one.
It was just having a lot of fun, having just really playful, and this is, I mentioned it earlier, but this is, I feel like, where you see the more evolved Joe very clearly, like, able to understand and love himself. Like, when he says the thing of, like, I could do that today, I already did it. That he gets quickly he does his Joe McMillan thing of, like, I don't want to wait for everybody to get on board. I'm going to go ahead and do it, which has caused him a lot of friction in the past, but now he's at a place where people know who I am, I know who I am, and I'm okay with it. So I thought that was very cool. And then Haley, oh, wait a minute, what's her name? The actress?
Susanna Skaggs.
Susanna. Just what a joy. Like, such a lovely human being, such a beautiful, lovely, honest performance, and just out of nowhere. Like, I remember we watched her audition in the writer's room, and you just love her immediately. And she was just so sweet and so fun to work with, and grew up so much, like, from the beginning of that season to the end. Like, she's a baby in that episode, she looks so young, and it's just wild.
I'm really curious about her because she was brand new to the scene, really. When you're writing for a character, I mean, a lot of shows do not give the younger sibling material, like any meaningful meat on the bone. And Haley got a lot, and Susanna was new. When you're writing stuff like this, how much of it is like, well, I guess we'll find out, versus, like, how much are you like figuring out what somebody's capacity is and where their strengths are through, like, watching it back later, versus how much just load into a scene and hope for the best?
I guess it's, having watched her audition and stuff, we knew that she was talented, and knew that that she had a sort of, like, raw honesty to her. I don't think we understood, like, her chops necessarily, like how talented she actually was. But I don't remember, like, I think we really liked her, and we really were feeling confident that she could handle this stuff, and gave her more heavier and heavier stuff to to do. And not having worked a lot, like I think a lot of these things she was doing for the very first time, you know?
Yeah.
So I watched, I was on set for episode 9 of that season because Mark Lafferty couldn't be there. So I was covering the episode for him. And there's a scene where she goes into a restaurant to like ask out a girl and gets embarrassed and goes back into her car and is pissed off at herself and crying. And you know, that's like a big acting moment when she's in the car. And Daisy, the director of that episode, just said to her, like, just go crazy, like go absolutely like to the extreme. And if it's too wild, I'll pull you back. Like, don't worry about that. And she just did this very vulnerable thing, you know, with all the attention focused on her and this big cruise, you know, and she just did it beautifully. And yeah, it was wonderful to watch.
Yeah. One more scene that I want to look at from this episode is a Donna scene. So in response to a dressing down she got from Diane, Donna's going to host a dinner party at her house for the Rover team. It's a great series of scenes. They're awkward, they're funny, they're heartfelt. It's a little bit of everything. I think this is like a sweet spot for you in your writing. I can tell like you do a really good job of balancing all these different things in a scene. We get a chance to sort of see a little bit from every character there, but there were a lot of characters to track in this episode, in this scene. How do you approach something like this where there's actually quite a lot of people that we're following?
Well, the process of breaking the episodes in the room was very meticulous. So like the all of the ingredients are agreed upon together, you know, like we all, you know, we figured out all the permutations and what exactly it's going to be. So there isn't it's not like I'm starting from a total blank page. I have a lot of information, and I think part of the when you're, we found that part of the work of the writer in writing the draft is we've broken a scene that in our breaking of it accomplishes 15 things or something, and then in writing it you make decisions about, well, it can't do all of these things, like what can fall away and what stays. And you're sort of carving from this block of story and information the scene. And yeah, I think the joy of that scene is, I mean, there's so much fun to be had there. She's sort of hopeless in terms of creating this camaraderie, and her daughter walks into it, which wasn't the plan, and isn't a person who's necessarily going to like build her up in front of her coworkers, but ends up unlocking a sensitivity and a connection in the room. And it was super fun to watch them shoot it. Carrie's incredible all the time. Really adept at when you need her to be playing 3 things at once, like can cover all those nuances. And it was also beautiful to watch Catherine Newton in that scene, who unlike Susanna had worked a lot and continues to work constantly. Still very young, but in so much control of her craft, like really impressive. You know, I remember at the end of that scene, there is a camera angle that I don't think ends up in the where in the show, but where they had a camera like move toward Catherine over the table as Donna's saying, giving her toast and saying, "Kiss that baby every chance you get." And I could tell that she was aware of the camera, like its position, its proximity to her, and that I remember when they called cut, the camera operator was still moving toward her, and she knew that and knew to stay in the scene. And as the camera landed on her, like a tear dripped out of her eye, and I was like, "This is insane that she's this." I mean, it was amazing. She was just awesome. It was just
What a
awesome to watch. Yeah.
powerhouse. What a
Yeah.
powerhouse. I mean, yeah, I mean, both all of the young actors that we got in the show were just really
Mm-hmm.
held their own. Um, we could have done an entire deep dive just about your last episode. So
Mm-hmm.
let's ask some questions here about Goodwill 408. First of all, the characters, the audience, everybody is grieving Gordon's death, but the first thing you see is Gordon on the screen. So tell me about
Mm-hmm.
the choice to frame this around a flashback scenes from the 70s.
So this goes back to that dinner party scene, actually, which is when I wrote that, I wrote in this thing about when Donna was pregnant, and uh, she's talking about that and how she had to hide her pregnancy. She was working at Radio Shack and da da da. And when I wrote that, I remember Chris Cantwell said, "We should do that episode. We should do an episode of them when they're about to become parents. She's working at Radio Shack. Like, I want to do that episode this season." And we all thought that was a cool idea. And then, as the season progressed, we realized like there isn't going to be room to do an entire episode that's out of our timeline. But if we were, it would have fit in that slot if we had it. And so that evolved into let's do let's bookend this episode with that point in their lives. And we really didn't want to, in his death, ignore Gordon's faults or have some flashback about what a great guy he was. We wanted to like honor the character and the relationship and the truth of who he was, and also recontextualize the moment from the previous episode when he's having this sort of like mind walk before he dies of seeing Donna singing to Baby Joni, which is like purely sweet moment in the previous episode. That memory feels very idyllic, and we wanted to complicate it, to make it just to make it more three-dimensional and richer and everything like that. And so we concocted this story about Gordon doing something sort of fucked up, just taking off without any word and disappearing for the night, and then coming back. And from Gordon's point of view, the moment of seeing them singing is no less sweet and it's no less powerful that was the moment that he experienced in death. But it tells you that Gordon was always erratic and prone to like bizarre behavior, but also shows you like how much he grew up, and that by the time he left them, he was an adult and a different version of himself. And tinges that moment with a little bit of, is it regret or something that he wasn't more present for that time in their lives and for Donna and all that.
Yeah, there, to stay on Gordon for a second here, there's a part of that scene, a part of that sequence where Gordon goes to a gas station. He's drinking some coffee. He's watching somebody on the phone. The person gets off the phone. He goes towards it, but instead he throws the coffee cup out. And I've struggled with knowing what the significance of that moment is. Is it for you another like he's doing erratic things, or he was thinking about making a call and didn't, because he wanted the moment for himself? Like what was he doing in that moment?
I think there's a lot of like there's a lot of like on a practical level, it was to tell the audience he had an opportunity to call and didn't. To sort of drive home how screwed up this is, that he does this to his wife, and the mislead of like, oh, he's waiting for the phone to call, and then you realize he's not, and you're like, oh, well, that's fucked up. And then there's also a lot of like sort of romantic open road imagery, like if he didn't have any attachments, the guy getting into his car alone, like, and it's sort of like a sporty car, like the truck pulling by, that he's thinking about being untethered, yeah. and having a sort of daydream about what that could be for him.
We get some really, there, as much as this is a grief-stricken episode, there's also a fair amount of comedy that's woven in, and then in the comedy it's grieving again because it's like, should we be laughing? And I love the way the Joe and Haley scenes play in this episode, between the fish head song playing in the car, stealing the wrong bag of clothing from Goodwill, and then having Haley drive the getaway car. I can't even say without laughing. So like when you're thinking about an episode like this that is so, deeply rooted in its grief, where was the line for you with the comedy?
So in our discussions of the episode, we all wanted it to be honest. We didn't want it to be just dreary and excruciating. We wanted it to be honest and sort of show the complexity of grief, like that on the worst day of your life, somebody or something's going to make you laugh, and that doesn't diminish your feeling for a person you've lost. It's just a bizarre fact of life that grief is a roller coaster, and you don't just fall into hysterics and stay there. You get something to eat, and you do thoughtless, boring tasks and all sorts of things, and you take your mind off of it, and you also sort of struggle to find a way to address it and to be useful and to alleviate grief for other people. And so all Joe wants is to be able to come through, because these kids have lost their dad, and there's nothing to you can do about it. And so he's grasping for things, and the thing he latches onto is this sweater. I'm going to get her this sweater back, and then that will have been something. But obviously that is, regardless of whether he got the sweater or not, an impossible thing to do to make it any better for Haley. And so it dramatizes that. And also just Joe not getting her on a, like, the fish heads level, like that he's like, this kid is so fucking weird. Like, if it was Joni putting on a record, then it's something that he knows, and he can, they could have like a moment rocking out together that would be cathartic somehow. But she's, a weird comedy nerd, and he doesn't get it,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. This episode really makes me wonder, and I'm glad we didn't see a scene like this, but like, it makes me wonder if there was ever a conversation between Joe and Gordon about what would happen after Gordon passed, like, because he's became such a cool uncle kind of figure in their lives. And we never saw, but like, that he was spending more time with Gordon's kids after learning that Gordon had this progressive illness. And so it's just like, an episode like this makes me wonder, like, what conversations did they have or not have around this, that Joe feels like a responsibility to this situation. There's a new character that comes in this season that I think is just so good. It's Katie, who ends up, she's got an important role on the Comet team, but she's also going to be Gordon's girlfriend here. In this episode, there's some really good Katie scenes. There's this a beautiful exchange between Katie and Donna. And we're reminded in this episode that Katie is the one who found Gordon dead. And it's just such an interesting juxtaposition for me of Katie being like the most recent person to love Gordon amidst all of these people who've loved Gordon for a long time. What opportunities did you see as a writer when you started adding Katie into these scenes?
Just what you're talking about, the disparity of time spent with him, and feeling like, it's another weird thing about grief, that the feeling of like, does this belong to them? Do I have any ownership over this awful feeling? Imagining like a hierarchy of connection. It's awkward to be, she knows these people, but not nearly as well as they all know each other. But it's a violent loss for her, that they were falling in love, and it ended tragically and suddenly. So just to play all of that, and to have her say, I was jealous of how much Gordon you got, like you got young, hell-raising Gordon, and Donna listening to that and not saying, because of course you wouldn't in that situation, like, well, it wasn't that great, you know. But
Like we got
but
divorced.
yeah, but we're seeing that in the bookends, you know, like that not all of Gordon was awesome. Um and yeah, just this person who's sort of collateral damage, you know, in this situation. And it's just an awful, bizarre thing. And that person just has to leave town. Like, there's too much Gordon here. There's too much Gordon all over the place. And I need to find somewhere else to be, because yeah.
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 A scene that I think is so beautiful in how long away we've come from season one is Boz feeding Joe chili and kind of
Mm,
knowing exactly what to say to Joe to get him to eat the chili to take care of himself.
uh,
What a distance these two have traveled since the days when you were first writing for them in season one. So,
mhm.
I especially love being able to ask this question to you as as me, one of the only people in the writer's room who was there for that whole span. What does a scene like this mean for you?
Well, um, it's just it's lovely to see people be tender with Joe, because he's been the subject of so much anger and distrust and everything like that. So you know that moment is preceded by Bosworth trying to tell a, you know, Gordon anecdote or something, and Joe saying, "I'm not ready to do that," which was an experience that I had when I lost a friend in college. And somebody, the night we learned that he died, one of my friends started to say, you know, tell some story. What I always felt about our friend Chuck, and I was like, I'm not ready for that. And I just lifted that experience and put it in, because it was a visceral feeling for me of like, I'm not. We can do that at some point. Talk about this person in the past tense and reflect and smile, and I'm not ready to do that. Like, um, and you know, Bosworth gets it. Bosworth is dealt with a lot in his life and knows what Joe understands, where Joe's coming from, and knows what he needs and doesn't need. And um, you know, sort of like Joe grasping for something, to some way to be helpful. Bosworth understands people have to eat. Like, I can do that, you know. Um, so I can't remember whose pitch it was. The whole test that I remember it, the you know, test the heat on this for the girls. Make sure they'll, you know, he has this ruse to get Joe to actually consume the food
And
and
to
the
know that
comfort.
Joe is now a guy who would be convinced by that. Like
Yeah.
season one, Joe, you say test this out to make sure it's okay for everybody else. Like he'd be like, whatever,
Uh-huh.
like just to see, even in just that,
Uh-huh.
how far he's come.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And giving you know, the generosity of spirit of giving Joe a way to be useful, you know, to help the family, like make sure the girls aren't going to get hurt by this, you know. um which is all that Joe wants, is to alleviate their suffering somehow. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh. One more scene that I want to look at from this episode is just this stunning scene of almost, it ends up playing for almost 6 minutes in this episode, of Donna and Cam having a heart to heart outside. It feels very real. It feels honest. It meanders in their thoughts, but it also feels very grounded in uh, what they're needing to say to each other, what they've been needing to say to each other, and in processing the current feelings as well. Um, it feels like this is another one where, like you were saying with the dinner table scene with Donna and the Rover team, there's probably like a lot of things you need to accomplish here. But for you, like, what were some of the main objectives for something like this?
It was a very, exciting thing to write because it'd been building toward their reconciliation for so long. And so I guess they both found in one another, like, in that moment, like, I can say all the things I'm thinking. Can be honest with you. I don't need to protect myself, and or protect you. And knowing that the audience wants these people to like each other, that we as writers want them to like each other and to work together, made it not easy, but like joyous to write. And again, just figuring out what needs to be said, what can fall away, and just those last lines of "I miss you too." Well, I'm here. It's them both realizing like life's too short to stay angry at each other. You know, um, if if this relationship is as important as we both feel it is, we shouldn't spend any more time at each other's throats. Yeah.
What an episode. Just a couple questions that are a little bit broader as we wrap up. Were there any characters that were particularly like, which characters did you enjoy writing for the most, if you think of it that way?
It was so, I mean, I felt I don't want to leave anybody out because I feel so lucky to have written for Lee Pace and Scoot McNairy and Carrie Bechet and Mackenzie Davis, like, and Toby House. I mean, they're all incredible. And I rewatching it really just brought that home for me. When I mean, into season 2, as these characters mature and our understanding of them as writers matures, the actors get more and more confident, you know, in who this person is, and it's reflected in their performance. And we're all growing up, literally, too. Having life stuff happen, and disappointments and successes and stuff like that. And it's just beautiful. I mean, it's just beautiful. To answer your question, I mean, I really loved writing Boz. Like, his voice is so specific and such a departure from the other characters. I loved writing Donna and Gordon because just how loaded it is. Like, Gordon, the way he shares things or doesn't share things because he doesn't want to fuck up, you know. Uh, like, that dance of a marriage, is really fun. I'm really rewatching it. I was really proud of that flashback scene that starts out at the beginning as bonding over how annoying her parents are, and then turns into a fight. That feels very real to me, where it's like you can pile on. People are comfortable with you piling on to a certain extent, and then it becomes too much. And and brings up all this other stuff for them. Mackenzie was just amazing, like a live wire running through her that makes everything she does interesting. And she had a really sophisticated under idea of who Cameron was and wasn't. I remember she had a note. I can't remember what episode it was, but I had her saying, "I love you," maybe in like an offhand way or something to Boz or something, or to one of the something. And she called and said, like, "I don't think Cameron says I love you. I don't think she's comfortable saying that to anybody." Like, that was a choice she'd made, which I thought was interesting. And that led to that scene with Tom where he's saying, "Just say the words, like, just say the words," because he knows that she cares about him, but he wants her to say it, but she can't. Mark O'Brien was amazing. Such a joy to work with, and so fucking talented. And I was so thrilled that in season 4 I got to have that one scene with him, that I got to work with him one more time, because he's such a fun actor, and like Carrie, like, he's really good at playing so many layers at once. And yeah, so it was all fun. Yeah, and I actively pursue working with all of them again. Like, anytime I write something, I think about, like, is there a part for any of those people? Because they're all great.
Yeah. You were starting to do it there, but are there any last sort of like favorite scenes or moments on working on the show, moments of working on the show that you remember that you wanted to share with us?
I there's a lot. One thing that I remember seeing on set in the moment and being blown away by, and then again when I rewatched it, was in season 2, the end of that party episode when Joe realizes what's happened, that they've stolen Mutiny, and but he's high and comes in to try and say, "I didn't have anything to do with this," but he's sort of out of his mind on drugs and can't articulate himself well. And I just love that moment for him as a character. It's so tragic that even when he's doing the right thing, people see him as doing the wrong thing. And I just thought that Lee was amazing in it. Just played very honestly from both sides. Like, you totally get why they aren't listening to him when he's like, "But there's this guy Jesse, like, he," and it just sounds like a kid telling a made up story. And yeah, I thought that was really cool, that Lee did an amazing job with that, watching him film it. I also, in Goodwill, my last episode, when Joe, he's tasked with, like, gather up Gordon's clothes, and he finds his jacket hanging up, and in the pocket is a paperback that Gordon had been reading, and bookmarks right in the middle of it. Like, this is an interrupted life. And that was something that I had experienced, that the year when we started working on season 4 in the fall of 2016. Very dark time for everybody, but I my dad had died that March, and in his, you get a bag of stuff from the hospital, everything he had brought in with him. And one thing was a paperback book with a bookmark in the middle of it. And it was a nothing dumb, airport thriller like paperback. It wasn't like a meaningful piece of literature at all. But I was just struck by that image of like he was reading to this point and then stopped. And put that in the episode as a just a representation of that interrupted life. And then once we'd wrapped, we all the writers got together, just to hang out and catch up. And Chris Rogers gave me the book, the prop, Streets of Laredo.
Is Streets of Laredo. I was just going to ask you
yeah.
what it is. Okay.
Yeah. Which came out in that time frame. And also Lonesome Dove is like a favorite book of my family's. Like everybody has gotten that for Christmas at some point. My dad loved that book. Streets of Laredo is the follow-up. Lonesome Dove's about a friendship between two guys and one of them dies. Like, and this is the Streets of Laredo is the aftermath of that. Like, so it had all these different connections. Chris setting that aside for me was so sweet, and a reflection of like just how intimately bonded we all became on that 4th season. We're all still in touch. It's Angelina's birthday today. I just got a text message on the chain saying happy birthday, Angelina, from all the Halt writers. And people, bared their souls in the room and shared lots of like heartbreaking memories and stuff like that. And it all ended up in the soup of the show. So like, identifying where things came from. I mean, I'm so proud of the work I did on the show, but don't feel I only feel ownership in a good way, not like I'm proud to have done this with all these people. There's nothing in any of my episodes that would have been as good if I had written it without their input, and there's even favorite lines that were pitched when I was getting notes. I remember in the scene where Haley accidentally pulls up a porn site on the projector screen, Smut Hut. Joe says to Joni, like, oh, she's wearing a Jane's Addiction shirt. And he's like, oh, I was listening to Ritual on the way over here. And she goes, don't try. Yeah. And that was Chris Rogers, I think, pitched that line, which I loved. It was so fun to write those two teenage characters in 1994. They were like the exact same age. I think I was the age that Haley was in 94. And so like all of the cultural references, it was less like doing research and more just remembering. And so fun. I feel like I land somewhere between those two girls in terms of, oh, look at that. I made balloons happen. Wow. Okay. Good
How about that? Who came up with this signal? That's not going to happen on my screen.
I know some of them. I didn't know balloons. This is how tech savvy I am. I can create balloons.
Amazing. Magic. Absolute
Uh,
magic. When you talk about Smut Hut, good things happen, I guess.
yeah, and yeah, loved that scene. Was so fun to write and to shoot. Um, the smooth hoot. Um, um, but yeah, like Haley's got a "They Might Be Giants" poster on her wall. That was the first concert I ever went to. Um, I'm a huge Jane's Addiction fan. Like the writing those characters was so much fun. Uh, and yeah, I mean, I remember also I wasn't, for whatever reason, my first episode of the first season, I wasn't on set for the shooting of it. So, um, but I was there for the one I co-wrote with Davi, or at least for part of it, and uh, walking into the bullpen of Cardiff Electric for the first time, like just overwhelming emotion. Like this, it was beautifully done. But also I was stepping into this world that I'd been imagining for the past several months. And um, it was just, it was so cool. And um, yeah, it was all also like the amount of life stuff that I checked off over the years writing on the show. Like, I mean, and for all of us, I mean, Cantwell had just had his first kid when we started season one, which is like how he managed to do. Oh, sorry, how he managed to like function at all is a mystery to me. But um, my wife was pregnant during season one. I remember when Davi and I were working on that episode, she came over to my house to work on it, and my wife was very pregnant and very uncomfortable, and I had to, fetch her things while we were trying to break the episode and stuff. And then yeah, had a new baby in season two while I was there shooting my first episode of season two. Uh, my niece was um, my niece was born. She was born prematurely. She was like 2 pounds. It was really harrowing, terrifying experience. And I was, juggling that and the show, and then, I my dad dying, like all of this stuff, just like big life moments. And I feel like I evolved as a person and as a writer so much over those seasons. And so yeah, I don't know, watching them again, it feels like looking through a high school yearbook or something. Like just really amazing, all the memories it brings back.
Oh, this is so beautiful to hear. One last question, and I don't even know really how to phrase this anymore because it's been such a strange time in your industry, but what are you up to now, or what have you done recently that you can talk about, or plug something if you want to?
I don't know if I can plug. I don't know if I can plug things. One cool thing about this group of writers is if they're doing something and they ask me to be involved, um, I just say yes. Like, so the Chris's had another show at AMC after Halt ended, called Rainy Day People, that didn't end up going. But I went and worked on when they sent me the script and said, "Would you want to come work on it?" I was like, I'll read it, but I don't need to. The answer is yes. And Lisa Albert also worked on that, um, and Angelina, and that was a beautiful experience. It's a crime that show didn't get made. So good. But then a couple of years ago, got a call from Melissa Bernstein, producer on the show, um, whose baby was in Goodwill as baby Joni. saying that Mark Lafferty had a show at AMC, and I just said yes. I'm there. We worked on that adaptation of a John Frankenheimer movie called Seconds, very loose adaptation, but was Lisa Albert was also in that room. So much fun to work on. That one still has hope of reaching screens sometime. I'm very excited about the stuff I'm working on my own. I'm not sure that I'm allowed to talk about it yet, but yeah, I don't know. Stay tuned. I hope to work again. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's the tricky part about asking this question, but I'm sure, everybody will start checking your IMDb page who's listening to this so they can see what gets announced and when. But thank you so much for doing this interview, for taking so much time. I mean, to write 6 episodes of this show is you had a huge job in helping to form our impressions of what this show is going to be. So, thank you for going through all of it with me.
Thank you so much. It was absolutely a joy to revisit, and thank you for creating this sort of document of, all the voices that played a part. It's very cool.
Oh, it's been so amazing to see this oral history come together, but thank you for that. And to everybody who's watching this, please go out there and watch Halt and Catch Fire. Yes. Bye, everybody.